well, I'm going overseas. He says, oh, really? So then I told him, and he said, well, don't tell your mom till you go, because she said she'll have a fit. So never told Mom until I was going. So she was crying, told me I shouldn't have joined this. I should have gone back to the States, because the States wasn't in the war yet.
On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, marking the beginning of the Second World War, the deadliest conflict in human history. The war directly affected hundreds of millions of people from more than 30 countries. Close to 1.1 million Canadians fought in the Second World War, with 250,000 men and women serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Well, the Air Force had a reputation of being a bunch of snobs. And that's the Army's version. I was sitting next to an older man, probably around 30. And he said to me, son, why are you here? I said, well, I'm going to join up. He said, did you get called up? I said, no. He says, well, you shouldn't be joining the Army. He says, join the Air Force. He said, they treat you better in the Air Force. So I went to the Air Force recruiting office and joined up and had no problem.
Before the war started, I was playing a game of grass hockey on our open-air ice rink, but in the summertime, and 3 hurricanes flew right down low across the field where we were so close we could see the pilots' faces. And I said, that's what I want to do.
When I was knee-high to a grasshopper, my father took me up for a ride in an airplane. I sat in his lap, and I was hooked from that moment. Started making, like most kids my age at that time, model airplanes, always as if they were real. Then when the war came along, like most boys my age, I was so keen.
I joined up when I was 17. I had to get permission from my father and mother. I had just finished grade 10 in junior high school, and I joined up right away.
The radar came along and it interested me, and that's what got me to join the Air Force instead of the Army.
I was learning photography, and I thought, well, in the Air Force, you know, like I found out there was a photographic branch there. Didn't know what they did other than photograph. But I said, that's where I want to go. So I wanted to go to Ottawa to take a course.
In 1940, I was 20 years old, so I knew I was going to have to go in something. And the Air Force was the thing to go in because that was the preferred service as far as young people were concerned. It was very glamorous to fly.
I've got uncles and aunts who were in the First World War. And there's pictures of mud, the trenches and dirty old mud. I don't want that. Then there was this, oh, we got the Navy. Up and a down, up and down. No thank you, I don't want any of that. No up and down. So that left the Air Force. So that's why I joined the Air Force. Yep.
I remember training one of these babies back home. Thought I was gonna be a fighter pilot, but it wasn't in the cards.
Why did you pick the Air Force, Johnny?
Well, I guess you could say it picked me.
How so?
Well, you see, my father joined the Royal Naval Air Service in the Great War. the First World War.
So it's in your blood.
You could say that, but it's much more than that. Back when my father flew his Bristol F-2B fighter in 1917, airplanes had only been around for 14 years. Just think of that, Andy. From the first flight of the Wright brothers in 1903 to aerial dogfights over the Western Front by early 1916, my father and his fellow pilots set the stage for the role of the aircraft in the Great War, and I wanted to play a part in ours.
All right, but what if you couldn't cut it with the Air Force and they sent you off to the Navy or the Army?
Well, I guess I'd be fighting on land or on sea. Personal choice doesn't figure in when it comes to war. You go where you're told, you follow orders, and you do your best.
Sounds like a real lack of options there.
Many times that's what war boils down to, Andy. A lack of options.
Seeing what happened during the war in Poland, the terrific destruction and the cruelty on the part of Germans who attacked us, I decided to switch over the branch and decided to join the flying personnel.
The government was asking for help because they needed help badly. So as my father was older already, so I felt like it was my duty to volunteer. So I did volunteer and went over to England.
I'd have me a Pole or a Czech as part of my crew any day, no questions asked.
Why? What was so special about them?
Are you kidding? Polish pilots are some of the best trained. And unlike us Canucks who sailed over the Atlantic to fight in this war, they've been fighting it to kick out the Nazis from their homeland. You could say they have a way bigger stake in it than us.
But weren't you putting your life on the line just like them?
Yeah, but it's a little bit different, don't you think? If some palooka walked into your home and said it's his home now, and if you don't like it, he'll kill you and your family. What would you do if that happened?
The Commonwealth people, they came to Canada to learn how to be pilots or whatever in order to help fight the war. I think there was over 200 stations across Canada. They could be gunnery schools, they could be flying schools for pilots, air gunners, navigators, whatever, wireless operators. And a lot of the schools also taught the women's division and the ground crews. Canada was picked for the plan against other Commonwealth places because if it's large area, if we were far enough away from the war and a good atmosphere for training purposes.
What's with the yellow? Why do the trainers over here look like flying mustard containers?
Simple. So that the pilot trainees don't hit one another. So that they can easily be found if a recruit has to do a forced landing or even crashes. And with all those yellow trainers filling the skies above Canada, US President Franklin D. Roosevelt calls us the aerodrome of democracy. The BCATP, or the plan, is the single largest aviation training program in the history of war. With close to 130,000 recruits in Canadian schools and airfields across the country, we're doing our part and then some.
But why did they pick Canada? Isn't it a bit of a stretch from here to Europe?
That's exactly why. We're top dog because of our good weather, our wide open spaces, and lack of any real threat from the Luftwaffe or the Japanese fighters.
Still, wasn't this plan bringing the war a little too close to home?
You know what they say? In for a penny, in for a pound.
What the heck does that mean?
It means you can't just stand on the sidelines, Andy. Sometimes you gotta go all in and run with the ball.
They asked me if I wanted to go in fighter command or bomber command. And he said, oh, but of course, you know, fighter command, there's 6 months waiting. Boy, 6 months. At 20 years old, you don't want to wait 6 months. So I took bomber command.
Well, he says, right now we're looking for bomber pilots. I said, no, I want to be a fighter pilot. He says, well, why? I said, if I make a stupid mistake in the air, I want to be the only one to go down, not with a plane full of crew.
No regrets about not being a fighter pilot?
Like Buzz Burling? That's screwball. He's flying pretty high as Canada's top ace right now with 31 victories. Nah, he can have the glory. And he can sell the war bonds back home. I'll take my lank any day of the week.
But what if you were the one that made a mistake up there, and because of it, some of your crew members were killed? I mean, how would you get over the guilt of that? If it were me, it'd beat me up.
Mistakes happen all the time in war, Andy. Being afraid of making one is the biggest mistake of all.
When I got in that airplane the first time, I pictured myself getting in my model airplanes, you know. That was the feeling I had. At last, I'm getting into an airplane, you know.
The first aircraft, it was a Fleet Finch, which was a trainer biplane. Looked like a First World War fighter aircraft. It was a great aircraft to train in. It was thrilling.
We had tiger moths, and lovely tiger moths. The tiger moth was an airplane that somehow it just grabbed your heart. She could bite, boy, she could hurt you. She could kill you if you let it.
Do you remember your first flight, Johnny?
It's like your first kiss, Andy. You never forget it. My father taught me how to fly when I was 16 years old in his old rickety de Havilland Moth. He bought it for a song at an air show. Imagine that. When he hopped out of that plane and he told me to take it up on my own, I felt like I was free. Free as a bird, just like the saying.
You were 16?
Yeah, I started late, but I caught up quick.
They agreed to take me in the RCAF. I wanted to be like these flyers you see and floating around in the air and shooting at each other and everything other that. Thought that was just fine. Everybody wanted to be a pilot and do this. But of course, everybody couldn't be a pilot.
All during your training, you were subject to being washed out. If, you know, you were always on observation as to your ability. If at any time they figured you're not quite with it to be a pilot, you know, then you would be called into the CO and he would say, I'm sorry, but you are not progressing the way we've hoped you would be to become a fighter pilot, and therefore I have to turn you back into the Air Force to become some kind of a tradesman or something.
I started out to be a pilot, but I was washed out I was flying Tiger Moths, and the guy that washed me out, he said, Jim, he says, I'll let you go on, but he says, you might be better doing another part of the air crew, so I became a navigator. I did my navigation course. It took 6 months, and I graduated the latter part of 43.
When I went to the recruiting depot and said I wanted to be a pilot, they gave me a medical, and the doctor said, "I'm sorry to tell you, son, you cannot be a pilot at all because your eyes don't converge." And that is what allows you to have depth perception, which you can't land an airplane without. So when I was on guard duty, I was standing for hours with a rifle with a bayonet on it. So I practiced bringing this bayonet up to my eyes. And at the ground school, they had another examination. When the doctor checked my eyes, started to write something down. "Hey, there's something wrong here. These numbers aren't anything like the first time you were checked." I was all ready for that. I said, "Oh, it must be a typographical error."
How could someone get washed out?
Crashing is always a good way. Physical reasons like bad eyesight, bad hearing, and bad attitude, they get rid of the bad eggs pretty quick.
Did you get a flying license when you passed?
A flying license? Like a piece of paper? That's a real knee slapper. No, cadet, you get your wings. And getting your wings is one of the proudest days in any pilot's life in the military.
They had bales of hay in the field, like a convoy or whatever, and you had live machine guns in your wings, and you flew down and strafed them, you know, as though you were in battle and you were strafing German convoys or whatever, ships, whatever.
I was so keyed up about this single-engine airplane. The Miles Master was the name of the aircraft. It was a two-seater, something like the Harvard, which has a front seat and a back seat. The thing about the back seat was that the instructor, in order that he could see to land the aircraft, had the canopy which would raise up like a windscreen, and he could raise his seat up and he could fly away like that. And it was great fun to go a little too fast and slam the old instructor on his head with this thing. But I got 17 hours on a single-engine aircraft, and it was spiritual.
I went up with another fellow on a tail chasing exercise where he flies and does everything he can do to shake me off his tail, and then we switch. Well, he didn't shake me off, but when we switched, I did one maneuver and lost him. And when I pulled out of my dive, looked around, I didn't know where I was. I hadn't brought a map with me. I had flown in close formation with this fella out to where we were exercising, and I hadn't watched where we were going. The visibility was so bad that when you looked down, all you could see was a little circle of the ground. I thought I was southwest of Ottawa, so I flew northeast, and I ended up somewhere in Quebec. And then I flew down and read a name off a railroad station, and it was in French, so I knew where I was. So I turned south. Then I saw these long, narrow farms going back from the river, and I remembered from my history book the Seigneurie Farm Division in Quebec. I said, I knew where I was then, but I was just about out of gas. And I was just going to pick one of these fields that looked quite nice. They just looked like parallel runways. When I saw a little airplane, a Fleet Finch. I didn't know what it was then, but it was a Fleet Finch, and I followed it home to its airfield, which was at Cap de la Madeleine, just by 3 rivers.
I'd had maybe 10 hours of flying, and then I'm in Harvard. Oh, it's a bit dicey, you know? It's like the first time you get into how to drive a car, you're a bit scared about how to drive a car. Same thing with at Harvard. I had a lot of fun when I got to learn how. Geez, doing loops and rolls. The best one of all, when I got up with my friend in the clouds, and we played Follow the Leader, and up the cloud, around the holes. Oh.
Oh. When you graduated, that was the biggest thing in your life up to that time.
When I finished my course, my father, who just returned from England as a captain in the army, was there to pin my wings on my tunic. He was a little too enthusiastic. He stuck the pin right through my tunic and jabbed me in the chest. I didn't budge, of course, but it was painful.
You know, when I think of it, it was a very special day in 1942, Remembrance Day, and that's when I got my wings.
Winston Churchill said that the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan was one of the greatest contributions of Canada for the World War II. Those that didn't get overseas got really no recognition. Unless I wear my wings on my uniform, my Air Force Association uniform, you didn't know whether I was working in an office or what. You had no idea what I did to contribute to the war effort. Canada should present the training officers with some kind of recognition for their effort in the war. Canada was called the War in Canada. Our dead received no special accommodations. You were just shipped home to wherever you came from. I remember one time, about 25 years after the war, a Harvard aircraft was discovered with the skeleton still in it that they had never found when it crashed. No recognition at all for those of us that served.
The Queen Elizabeth was taken over as a troop ship. At that time, it was the biggest ship afloat. And we were 6 days on the boat in Halifax, and there was troop ships coming in all the time from different parts of Canada until we filled up. We were just ready to sail when 2 Liberty ships came in, and they were full of Yankee troops. And they'd sprang leaks out in the Atlantic. So they brought them into Halifax, and there was 6,000 of them. And they put them on our boat. We were already full. So there was nowhere to sleep. You slept on the deck. And even in the toilets, you had to step over these guys when you went in there, because they were sleeping there. Anywhere you could get, you could sleep on the floor.
In January in 1942 on the North Atlantic, the food was so terrible that the potatoes they took out of the bag of potatoes, dirt and all, boiled them, and that's how you got them. And I went to the tuck shop and I bought cookies and lived on that for the trip across.
Since you were a bomber pilot, why didn't you just fly your length over to Europe?
That's not quite how it works. You see, most combat aircraft built in North America take a series of air routes over the Atlantic Ocean to get to Britain. Once the planes are here, the pilots take them to different airfields. Some of the pilots are even dames.
Dames?
women. Andy, geez. We call them the Atta Girls because we tell them, Atta Girl, you delivered the plane in one piece. They just love that. The gals, they fly all types of aircraft that I wouldn't get behind the controls of. Surprised?
No. Should I be? Women are fighting in wars now.
Women shouldn't be fighting in a man's war.
When you first get overseas, you go down to Bournemouth, and that's a great place for a young guy. Dance halls and pubs. Oh.
The pubs were very good, and the beer was cheap. I understand Churchill ordered these breweries to have lots of beer, to keep up the morale of the people. And the pubs used to go in there, and if they had, everybody would sing, everything. He didn't drink that much to excess. He never got drunk or anything like that. You couldn't buy food like you can now in the pubs, but there was very, very little food. Fish and chips was about the only thing I can think of that you could buy. And it was always done and wrapped up in paper, and it smelled real good and tasted real good.
I was billeted in a private home. Mrs. Simpson looked after me. She was a lovely lady. And every night when I came crawling home, she would have a glass of milk and a Scottish scone or something there for my bedside. When we were going overseas, they'd always, the old timers advised us to take over things that I think the girls would want, or people would want over there. So I knew sugar was a problem, so I took a big 10-pound bag of sugar, and also silk stockings. And the idea was give them one at a time, just one at a time. And so Mrs. Simpson was so nice that I gave her the sugar and the socks.